Hey there, I'm Colin Weston. I'm the host of the Mod Golf Podcast, and today my guest is Eric Sedransk, who is the CEO and founder at Member for a Day. I just had an awesome conversation with Eric on our podcast, audio long form version that I will put the link to that down below because that was a completely different conversation to what we're going to have here. Got to keep it fresh here. Don't want to do the same thing twice. Otherwise, why would you go listen to that if you're watching us here? So, hey, to get us started off, I wanted to pull Eric up on screen here and introduce him. Eric, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Colin, nice to be back here with now I got to make sure my hair looks good. So hopefully I'm doing okay.
There we
It
go.
doesn't look as good as yours, I'll tell you that.
Well, unlike a lot of our friends, at least we have hair that we have to worry about that looks good or not, right? So I guess that's something, right?
Absolutely.
Right. If I ever lose it, then I'll shave it all off. But for now, I'll just keep on going here. It's part of the brand. If I cut it off, I probably look like every other middle-aged white dude. So
That's great.
we'll keep it flowing and keep it going here. So, hey Eric, why don't we start off here a little different than our previous conversation? I want to hear your first connection to golf. At what age did you first pick up a golf club, and what was that experience like? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember I was really bad. Um, I was a little later. I was a three-sport athlete growing up. I played a lot of basketball and soccer and lacrosse growing up. So golf was not a sport for me. So I didn't play competitive golf until I was probably 25 years old. So a little late. But a few things happened. One was my father retired at a relatively young age. He was in his low 50s and was a bit type A, was just kind of pacing back and forth in the house. So my mom was like, go play golf. And he was like, no, golf is for, fat old people. That sounds terrible. He was a triathlete and a basketball player. But that was also the time where Tiger was starting to come up and golf became sort of cool. And so him and I kind of collectively were like, let's go try this. And to answer your question of what it was like, I just remember I had never played a sport before that my athletic ability and my strength and speed did absolutely nothing. It was like the harder I tried to swing, the further right the ball went. And, of course, as a 13-year-old kid, I would just swing harder and harder and harder, and I would just have bigger and bigger slices. So, I think where I first really fell in love with the game was just on the mental side. I had just never experienced a sport where, I was a natural athlete. So I would pick up sports and it was pretty easy, and golf was far from it.
Well, I feel your pain on that one too. I was the same as you. I would focus more on team sports growing up in Toronto, whether it was baseball, basketball here in Canada. So I played a lot of hockey. So as a teen, I played a little bit of golf, and I'm so old, of course, there was no such thing as the internet or YouTube. So of course, my swing was just terrible, right? Same as you, all armsy, just swinging as hard as you can, casting the club. I could not aim far enough left, and it would still end up in the trees on the right. And but now it's kind of getting better and enjoying the game more. Funny that when I hit more fairways and lose less balls. So so I find this interesting. You didn't start off as a golfer, and you certainly didn't start your career until less than a year ago of having anything to do with nonprofits and charity foundations and platforms, even though you have volunteered in the past. So it's not like you had these two worlds and they kind of came together. You've kind of made that happen. So you're all about experiences with what you're creating with Member for a Day. So before we get into what the awesome things you're creating with a charity platform, I want to hear about your most awesome golf experience, some shot you remember, the best one, and also the worst one or a bad one that you can remember as a fail that you can share with us here for fun.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, in terms of experiences, I've never been a list chaser. I don't really care. What I'm after are the best, most fun experiences and vibes. And so I always love going to courses that are so off the grid. I mean, people ask me all the time, what's my favorite golf course that I've ever played? And it's Balionis in Colorado, which is in the middle of nowhere. It's 3 hours due east of Denver. It's basically in the Sand Hills, Nebraska. It's a Tom Doak design. There's a short course. There's no pool. There's no tennis course. It's just pure golf. and it's really laid back, and it's just amazing. And so I love that place dearly. You know, when I think about my best shot ever, it's kind of funny because I feel like this maybe answers both of your questions together. I was on the 14th hole at Torrey Pines South, which for really avid golfers, they'll remember in the last one that was there, they moved it up to a drive over in the final round. I remember Camilo Villegas driving the green in the final round. Normally it's like a pretty standard 400-yard par four. And so I blocked my drive because if you go left, it's in a canyon. It's in one of those Torrey Pines, the canyons that go straight down to the Pacific Ocean. So I blocked my drive right, and there's a line of trees. And so I try to hit some hero shot. It hits a tree and it goes straight down. So that's, classic, like bad shot, like probably not my worst shot ever, but definitely not a good one. It went like 30 yards. So I had 140 yards. I had to go under a tree. The green has two bunkers on either side. There's a narrow gap, and I mean narrow. And then the green kind of widens out in the back. And the pin happened to be kind of right in the middle. And I just hit this little knockdown running 8-iron, and it starts bounding. It's going right into the bunker. It hops the bunker. It goes up. It goes all the way around the green, and it goes right into the hole.
Shut up.
And it was like, I haven't really holed out from that far to begin with. Like, on perfect lies, on perfect days, perfect conditions, let alone like under a tree bouncing over a bunker. So there's no question that one stands above and sort of like going from like one of the worst shots to probably the best shot I've ever hit in my life.
Amazing. Well, it's all about experiences, right? And that's a story that you'll be telling for the rest of your life. So that segues nicely into the platform you and your team have created with Member for a Day, because this is really about unlocking unique experiences for people that they wouldn't have access to. So tell us the aha moment more than a year ago in New York City of how you got off the ground with your first kind of dipping your toe into what you're doing that became the foundation for what you've created with Member for a Day.
Yeah, sure. The short version is I was living in New York City. I lost my job. I decided that living with my mother in Hilton Head, South Carolina would be a whole lot safer and more enjoyable than being stuck in a shoebox apartment in New York City. And so I was down there just playing golf, going to the beach, and it just felt wrong. I just started feeling really guilty. And it led me down this path of looking to do something creative as a way to give back to those less fortunate, specifically hospital frontline workers in New York City who were just being inundated at that time. It was when like they were bringing cruise ships in on the Hudson River just to handle the amount of cases that were coming in. And so that was sort of the aha moment. And I basically just started reaching out to my network of friends who were either members or head pros at golf clubs, some of the most exclusive golf clubs in the world, mind you, and asking them if they would donate a round of golf to support the cause, specifically a group called Project Frontline that would buy meals at local restaurants to feed hospital frontline workers. And that little idea that I had on a bike ride that I went around Hilton Head, a week later ended up raising over $100,000. And that was it. That was the start.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I don't want to talk about the entire journey of where you were a year ago and where you are now, because we talked about that on the podcast. And I do want to encourage our viewers to become listeners and check out that engaging conversation. So I do want to fast forward it a little bit and ask you some different questions. And what had you touched on earlier is the transparency and the impact of where the money goes, and the fact that the kind of the technology kind of driven solutions you have with your good friend and co-founder and partner that you have there. I want to ask you this with blockchain, and a lot of people have, you've probably been familiar with blockchain for many years, and it's one of these things, well, what is it? And people talk about it, so this transparent ledger and all this stuff, and people still don't understand it. And I've even looked at how do you apply this to the golf industry. So I want to ask you this, Eric, is using blockchain technology for that transparency of where the money's going, is that something you're looking to help not only enable what you're doing, but also to help kind of power it forward? Is there any value in kind of sprinkling the kind of, what blockchain can do into what you're doing with Member for a Day?
Yeah, I mean, my gut tells me it's a bit of a leap, only because, when we raise money for an organization, although we haven't yet, but that doesn't mean nothing, things won't change. We're a small organization, we're growing and we're changing fast. We generally are raising money just for the nonprofit, and the nonprofit can use that money however they want, albeit um, I do know a lot about nonprofit fundraising now, and there is no doubt going to be a time in the near future where we start raising money for an organization that money is going to go specifically to certain groups and specific causes. So I think that's where it becomes interesting, because right now, the money, if it goes to the American Cancer Society, the American Cancer Society, it's their job to choose how they want to spend that money. If they want to spend it on advertising that they think will get the biggest ROI to raise the most money and do the most impact, that's great. If they want it specifically to go to, researching cancer or whatnot, they can do that too. But I think as we get deeper and deeper and more specific with our fundraising as it relates to specific causes with specific organizations, that's where blockchain could become pretty interesting. And again, we talked about this earlier. Like, transparency is so key to me. I haven't thought about that, but I think it's a wonderful idea.
Nice, nice. You also talked about this earlier with kind of the partnerships that you've been developing in order to move yourself forward, and that's really helped you take this lean startup approach. And that's, most people may think they're familiar with a lean startup, and I've talked about it a lot on the Mod Golf podcast, mostly with for-profit technology-driven solutions in the golf industry, but it applies to everything, and including a nonprofit. So I guess early on, it sounds like you then managed to kind of experiment very quickly and have that feedback loop and found what worked and kind of test different things. So you tell us this, if you will, what's one thing that you tried earlier on that you thought would work, or made some assumptions that you realized, kind of fell a little bit flat, you had to abandon that and try some different things? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I touch on this a touch on the podcast, but scheduling and fulfillment is a big part of our business, and we try to use Calendly for that. And I mean, I can go into it a little bit, but we broke Calendly. Essentially, the way we were trying to use it, we didn't realize that if two people booked appointments, or in our case, rounds of golf on the same day, Calendly wouldn't let it happen. Their software just doesn't work that way. They want you to buy basically hundreds of licenses. So we would be spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, which just wasn't going to work. Mm-hmm. So, I think our opinion, and I'm very fortunate, right? Both me and my co-founder, we both come from the venture capital backed tech space. And so our opinion on this thing is like, exactly like you said, like, fail cheaply, fail fast. And, you can always just bring in humans, actual human beings, to plug in those gaps of technology. And so when we used Calendly initially, there were some issues, and we just stepped in as human beings to provide customer service to make sure that the scheduling and fulfillment worked. But I've said this before, and I'll say it again, is Member for a Day came together 100% organically. I did not start this with a business plan. I did not start this to make money. I didn't do this at all for anything except to just raise money for New York City hospital frontline workers, and it's expanded ever since. And so my mindset has not changed since then. I think of this as one big test. And I think it's really important for entrepreneurs to think that way, because it takes all of the stress out. There's no pressure on me. We don't have investors. We don't have growth targets. We're just trying things and ultimately trying to raise as much money as possible through the game of golf. And that's it. And so that thought really frees me up as an entrepreneur.
Love that. That's such, great advice to give for entrepreneurs. Profit, for-profit, nonprofit, golf industry, other market sectors. It certainly does apply. So we talked about kind of lean startup and kind of the elements you've taken away from that, as far as minimal viable product and just getting out there and finding what works, and experiment and tinker as you've done and refine as you go. Another example, kind of business methodology that comes to mind, and we talk about this in the podcast and cite many examples, and that's blue ocean strategy. It's like, don't do what your competitors are doing. and not that you're competing against other nonprofits, but don't necessarily follow what the tradition is and where people say in business or charity is like, well, that's just the way it's done. So what lessons have you learned, without throwing other charities under the bus here, that you looked and say, that model's a bit stale, or use the term as far as donor fatigue, which I think is very appropriate. And with Blue Ocean Strategy, they on their blog, they've got an example of comic relief out of the UK, and they've got something called Red Nose Day, which is only one day a year. So it's a completely different model, differentiates themselves from kind of that continuous unrelenting raise of asking more and more that never ends. So it sounds like you've taken certain elements here from your business background and other charities. So what have you taken away to decided that you're going to do what other charities do, and things that you're going to do that they don't do, to kind of differentiate yourself and add value for everybody?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'm going to see if I can unpack that here.
Fair enough.
So I think when you think about traditional nonprofits, overwhelmingly, a lot of them fundraise via golf tournaments and in-person events, galas, dinners, lunches, that sort of thing. Well, COVID made those pretty much impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, in a weird way, COVID forced nonprofits to think outside the box. And here, me, this new guy, comes along with an idea called Member for a Day. And so because of that, nonprofits have been a lot more open to new ideas. I mean, I spoke to a friend the other day, their nonprofit revenue is down 70%, or I should say in 2020, it was down 70%. So that's like, you're in crisis mode at that point. And so, when I think about the traditional model, the galas, the golf tournaments, they're fantastic. And actually, I mean, I'm working in tandem with a golf outing right now, Tom Coyne's A Course Called America book launch golf event. We're running an auction that ends tonight. So there's a lot of synergies there. But what I always say to the nonprofits that I speak to is running a gala and running a golf tournament takes a lot of time, a lot of work, and oftentimes a lot of capital. You got to commit to paying upfront. Whereas with my model, there's none of that. The prerequisite is getting the rounds of golf, which a lot of nonprofits don't even realize it, but their donor base are members of great golf courses. And so they send an email out, all of a sudden they get 15 to 20 amazing golf courses donated, and then we do everything else. And it's as simple as that. And so I think, when I think about how we're fundraising and what we're doing differently, it's knowing that nonprofits are always resource constrained. You layer on COVID now, where they've probably laid off half their staff, they're like double resource constraint. And so the key is making it as simple and turnkey as possible. And I honestly, honest to God, we do everything from that point forward once the nonprofit gets the golf courses. So that's really the key here. And I think that's really what we're focused on, as opposed to sort of traditional fundraising.
And I also love, you've taken elements from that Airbnb or Uber business model too, where you're tapping into basically a dormant or underutilized resource that's just not being used 80-90% of the time, even though a lot of these golf courses are, but you're relying on these other assets that already exist, and getting other people to connect you to those, that you're not the one running around doing all that, because you don't even have the time or the resources or the bandwidth or the capacity, because that's very high touch stuff, a lot of conversations. So you have other people partners that are doing the work. So hey, I want to end this conversation with asking you this one question, or share a story with us. You shared stories earlier of success from the charity side of things. I'm sure you get wonderful feedback from people that have bid and won these experiences. Can you give us one example of the feedback you've received, either by email or however, of someone that's you've exceeded their expectations and you've knocked it out of the park? So can you share one off the top of your head there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I almost want to give that a thought to think that if there are some that I'm missing here. I do remember there was one specific guy who won a round at a golf course that I honestly can't remember. But he had this whole story about his father, who was a war veteran, who grew up playing at the golf course and hadn't been back in 40 years, and on and on and on. And just how incredible of an experience it was. And that just totally warmed my heart. And I think it's super important. And one thing we're really focused on here at Member for a Day is like you said, experiences. And I am so less concerned with stuff. So you're not going to see a lot of signed memorabilia and that kind of stuff. We are focused on experiences, because ultimately when we look back on our lives, we're not going to think about all the cars and stuff we bought. We're going to think about the amazing experiences with the people we love. And that example of the son buying the round of golf with his father, who hadn't been there in 40 years before his time as a war veteran, was incredible.
Love that. Well, with that touching story, and that resonates. That's amazing. So, thank you for sharing that. So, why don't we just finish it up there? And so, Eric Sedransk, CEO and founder at Member for a Day. This has been yet another great conversation where you've shared some completely different insights with your entrepreneurial journey and your why and your purpose and the impact that you're making. I'm cheering for you here, and I'm excited to see what unfolds in the next year and beyond, especially in a post-COVID world. I think it's just going to go kaboom for you in a great way. So, hey, Eric, thanks for joining me today on the Mod Golf Podcast.
Colin, it was a pleasure. So glad we got to connect, and looking forward to playing golf with you soon.
Yeah, as do I. And as I mentioned, I will put below in the notes here for everyone. They'll be able to connect with Eric so if you want to check out the website at Member for a Day, I'll put all that there. And you can, if you're a charity, hey, if you want to connect with Eric, you can do that there also. And hey, if you want to bid on an awesome golf experience with you and your buddies, and perhaps someone that's famous that aligns with you, and hey, lots of opportunities there. So we'll leave it at that. So once again, Eric, good to see you, and take care. Be safe.
You too. Thanks, Colin.